So tonight, Joao defeated Shan United of Myanmar 3-0, and depending on the other result that happens tonight, Johor Darul Takzim are almost certain to reach the semi-finals of the ASEAN Club Championship Shopee Cup for this season with an unbeaten record of 3 wins and 1 draw. And a brace from second half substitute Bergson and the opening goal by Oscar Arba sealed the win for the Southern Tigers as they dominated from the start to finish against the spirited but ultimately tired out Myanmar side. So overall it was a decent performance from the Malaysian champions, but the real focus for this video, the post-match reaction tonight, is more about 3 of the players who started for Johor Darul Takzim tonight after they actually returned from what was initially supposed to be a 1-year suspension that was imposed by World Football Governing Body FIFA over the documentation scandal. And the 3 of them were in JDT's books when they were thrown the ban. They returned into the starting 11 against Shan United, who were already eliminated from contention into the next phase before kickoff. And they are John Irazabal, who started in the left side of the 3-man defense led by Captain Shane Lowry, Hector Hevel, who partnered in midfield alongside Nacho Mendes and Michael Hogaldo, and Joao Figueiredo, who started up front alongside Gyro. So these 3 of them, they were given the opportunity to show what they could do after their enforced ban that cut short their promising starts at Sultan Ibrahim Stadium. And among the trio, John Irazabal was taken out at halftime, with the Southern Tigers held to a goalless draw at the break by their Myanmar opponents, while Hector Hevel and Joao Figueiredo lasted 77 minutes before they were substituted out. So the focus is mainly on those 3, how they do look after the lengthy ban that was imposed back in late September, just when they were taking off with the Malaysian champions. And the short answer, before I go into the detailed analysis, was unfortunately the ban that FIFA imposed, which was only lifted earlier this week, just before the mass resignation of the Football Persatuan Bola Sepak Malaysia Executive Committee, that was lifted only on Monday through the stay of execution by the Court of Arbitration of Sports. And with that, they were effectively allowed to return to training and also, I think, resume their playing careers after being forced on the sidelines, not on their own will and not through injury either. So, but the match rustiness was pretty evident in all 3. It's like how they played at the start of this season was in contrast to what they displayed tonight. All 3 of them showed plenty of fight and effort, but it is pretty evident that the lack of match practice was seen in how they played. I mean, I'll begin with the Spanish-born defender, John Irazabal. Irazabal admittedly only had 45 minutes of action, but he did not have much to do when it came to the defending aspect of the game. He was actually more than equal to the rare forays that Shan United were posing against the Johor defense. That was actually quite makeshift, with Lowry in the middle alongside Irazabal and Feroz Baharudin, who make a rare start for the Johor this season. So with that kind of makeshift defense, they were not severely tested. So what we could see is Johor not being given that much pressure, although they nearly had a scare in the middle of the first half from a rare Shan United set play routine. But while Irazabal, given his current physical and match sharpness, he was more than equal to the spirited but not as speedy attacker. But it was pretty evident that he was still not as sure in that one instance where one of the clearances he made resulted in a corner when what could have been a throw-in. I mean, when you have match sharpness, you'll be able to make the decisions a split second quicker, a split second sharper, and the footwork will be able to tell you where the ball should be going. So, but either way, Irazabal played a neat game overall with the ball. Rarely put a foot wrong when it came to challenging the opponents, but at a critical point where he actually mistimed his passing, I think this is pretty evident that there's still some work to do before Irazabal will be back to his best at the back, and that's where the Johor defense will clearly need his presence. So now moving on to Hector Hevel. Hector Hevel was actually the most settled among the trio this evening, where initially in the first 30 minutes, like Figueiredo and Irazabal, he also struggled to get the momentum going, where was really obvious that the other guys who started, take away also Feroz Baharudin also, the rest were more at ease. I mean, it was a mixture of starters and fringe players plus the trio. And this is pretty clear in the way how Hector struggled to impose himself. But once after the hour mark, it was pretty clear that Hector still had it, with a couple of promising forward passes that initiated the attacks, only to be thwarted by a very spirited Shan defending in the first half. But thereafter, he was not able to keep up the momentum he had in the first half. After the break, he had one particular mistimed pass, even though he contributed to the second goal. And among the rare few missed passes that Hector had was one missed pass that could have resulted in Bergson initiating an attack in the second half after he came on. So there was definitely still some work for Hector Hevel to do, but he's clearly the most settled among the trio for tonight's match, even though he lasted 77 minutes. And lastly, for Joao Figueiredo. Figueiredo actually half and half throughout, but the struggle was when he actually, you can see that the lack of match sharpness is most evident in the Brazilian-born striker. He did not have that same, he was unable to impose the same type of fear or threat that he used to before the enforced ban by FIFA. And initially he even struggled in getting past defenders. Even I think it was quite obvious as early on that without that extra match practice where strikers would acquire the extra yard and the extra alertness, the extra second of vision and ability to make that decision. So Figueiredo clearly struggled in this aspect during the first half, particularly when he had the ball, but he was often second best in that 50-50 duel with the defenders. In the second half, he had a slight improvement. He was able to cause a few issues, but still he wasn't much of a threat to be able to, with that closest effort that he had early in the second half when he shot over the bar, that lack of precision, the lack of, I think you can say that the lack of sharpness or the extra X factor that made him such a feared forward before the ban actually reduced him to just another striker for that 77 minutes that he was on the pitch, even though he indirectly contributed to the second goal as well, which was scored by Bergson. But ultimately, you can see that from their displays this evening that Johor, for Irazabal, Hector Hevel and Figueiredo, there is still some work to do. They still need a few more games under their belt to regain at least some of the mojo that they used to have when they first joined the club at the start of this season. After they make their debuts initially for the Malaysian national team, that remains under the verdict of the Court of Arbitration of Sports, which, as I mentioned in the last video yesterday, the appeal was expected to be known by the end of February on the 25th or 26th. But overall, the ban clearly had an effect. They are not as sharp as they used to be. There are still plenty of rough edges that had sort of grown overnight that they need to they need to cut away from, and also the focus in which I think they are able to provide to make they need to get back to the players that they used to be before the enforced ban. So you can see that this lack of match sharpness indirectly hampered Johor in the first half, and it was only the introduction of Bergson in the second half that turned the game around, just as Shan were holding out for a small defeat after the opening goal from Oscar Arbas. And when those substitute players who came on made the difference after the break. And beyond those three, there would also add an additional cause of concern for Feroz Baharudin, even though he was also untested and rarely played for Johor this season until today. This is probably his Shopee Cup debut or second game, but he clearly was not the same type of player that he was last season. And the lack of match sharpness and ability compared to Irazabal should have been more worrying. For Johor's head coach Xisco Munoz. And another area of concern was Johor, they won 3-0, but they also got 4 kad kuning. So and these kad kuning come from Figueiredo, Feroz, Nazmi Faiz and Shamir Kutiaba. All of them either sub-players or returning players. So their lack of match sharpness was evident in how they were quite careless in their handling. Their ability to handle against opponents were not of their level, but was spirited enough to want to cause some tough challenges to show that they are up for the game. And this is something that is rather negative in what was otherwise a decent victory that was only earned through those goals by the regulars. And for the trio of Irazabal, Hector, Hevel and Figueiredo to return to that level that Bergson, Arribas have already begun, or even Manu Hidalgo, then they will need a few more games to get back to shape during this period before the final CAS decision. And definitely another enforced ban thereafter to resume that ban will be very damaging for their careers. And for the other 4 who are not in action yet after the release of the ban temporarily, I think this is worth considering, because that lack of match sharpness, that lack of ability to cause a threat or to create an impact in the case of Hector in midfield, and for Figueiredo up front, not for the lack of effort, but the extra yards, as they say, that was taken away from them due to the level of rustiness that was built up during the few months that they were forced to sit out of action. And therefore, I think this is something Xisco Munoz and his coaching team will have to consider for the trio, that they needed a few more games, especially in the Liga Super Malaysia, ahead of what is expected to be a crucial double-header AFC Champions League elite encounter, first away against Sanfrecce Hiroshima and later at home to Vissel Kobe on the first day of the Lunar New Year. These games could make or break Johor's season, or even Xisco's coaching stints at the Sultan Ibrahim Stadium. But still, tahniah for Joao Darul Takzim for achieving the win and keeping their unbeaten record in the ASEAN Club Championship Shopee Cup, with 1 foot already in the semi-finals. And we hope that there are going to be better things, not just for the Johor Southern Tigers, but especially for the returning trio of Irazabal, Hector and Figueiredo. This is Tanya Jia reporting from the Sultan Ibrahim Stadium in the post-match reaction, signing off here.